Hi everyone, I can't see you, but maybe you can see me, and it's not so important. The main thing is that you see the images. I really need to thank Aaron and Alejandra for their incredible hospitality and their tenacious, will to bring us here that in the end got us here with you tonight. And thank you to all of you for being here. So we're gonna all submit to this exercise, which is the artist talk. That is a rather painful exercise, as you all know, because it supposes that the artist has a critical distance to her work, which is absolutely not true. And so it puts in this situation of schizophrenia where you're supposedly the critic, here you go, and the curator of your own work, which is so not true. So this slideshow is a mess, so be patient because I'm going to be jumping backwards and forwards because it doesn't read fully in preview. But I can put a full screen for this one, and then I will go back to the next slide that is at the top. So I've decided to begin with this work that is not so recent. It's actually quite old work, but it's a hopeful work. It reads, "But my love never dies." And it's a neon that we had made in Rome, and it's inspired by the title of a book that was a sort of survival guide written in at the end of the 60s in Italy, that was seized and confiscated but then reprinted, and it was like a sort of a multi-layered book on how to grow food and self-medicate yourself, behave in riots and things like that. So it was immediately considered as illegal, and it had this title. So it's an explicit reference to that. But here you see it installed in a particular situation. It's in the French Academy in Rome, where we got offered an exhibition 3 years ago, right? I'm really bad with dates, and I didn't bring the notes, but I think it was 3 years ago. Was it?
I think it was 2 years ago.
Okay. However, it's this beautiful building called Villa Medici, that is an antique and prestigious building. So we invested the outdoor part of the space, which here is the loggia. So, of course, we installed this work over a statue that is actually a copy of a statue because they're not allowed to have these really antique artifacts in the public space where they could get damaged. So it's a very faithful copy of a Roman statue that is both, you can't see probably very well, but it's been castrated by the passing of time and decapitated too. So this sentence on top of it is a sort of very hopeful sentence, and it becomes somehow site-specific there. And so the show was called Camp. Sorry. I mean, these gardens that you see from here are really built on this sort of idea of the jardin d'agrément that is very French, and it's really organized. It's a sort of extension of the indoors to the outdoors. Everything is structured in alleys and very symmetrical spaces that are extremely formal and are made for promenades. Like Versailles is the most absurd and extreme example of that, but this is the same type of garden architecture in a smaller version. It's a rather large garden, so we felt like there was something missing there. So James had the first idea that he wanted to put prostitutes there for the night, and so just around the garden that could actually work there, because this space is so contrived and controlled, it's absolutely impossible. But then in the end we decided to invest it with sculptures that are these washing lines with clothes on them. And basically what we wanted to do was not only alter the structure of the space and bring the human body in it that is sort of not allowed, because unless you're a resident, you're not free to walk around these gardens, but also was this idea that there can be somewhere hidden some refugees, some unwanted, unwelcome people that are camping in this space. So it's kind of interesting, the effect it produced, especially here, because you see that the draping of the statues takes a completely unmonumental aspect and gets brought back to the fabric of the actual real clothes, and the statues are not so austere anymore, and the presence of this element of domesticity completely alters and disturbs the symmetry of the space. If you have any questions or objections or anything, please feel free to interrupt, because I mean there is no problem. It's a very informal presentation, and if there is something that is also unclear, don't hesitate. So that was one project that we got invited, and at the same time we got invited to this other project called Fortezzuola, that was a desire of a museum that is not far from Villa Medici. It's in a similar, in a nearby area in the neighborhood, in this park that is called Villa Borghese in Rome. It's a very antique park. And so there's several houses in this park that used to be basically brothels that were there because it was the garden of the Delis and stuff, and then they changed use progressively. One is a theater, one is a planetarium now, and one of them is a museum that is dedicated to the glory of this figurative sculptor, very skilled, called Pietro Canonica, that lived between the two worlds and got basically all the fancy jobs that a figurative sculptor could get at that time, because it was a sort of crisis for figurative sculptures. So he was the man to call and to ask. So like dictators got their statues made by him, lots of cardinals, church people, noble families, etc., etc. So here, so this museum is structured in the following way. This is the basement, where actually what you're seeing is not Pietro Canonica's sculptures, but some absolutely wonderful antique things. This lion there is really ancient, and there's really some stuff that date back to the Roman time. And so these sculptures that are here are in a sort of hospital for sculptures, where they can't be in the open, in the public space anymore, because they are too precious or too damaged, and so they are kept by the administration of the city in this more or less climatized basement, and so this is the basement of the house, and then this is the house where Pietro Canonica used to live. So on the ground floor you have lots of his artworks, some maquettes for monumental sculptures, and most of his busts and things, Mussolini's bust too, which is a little bit hidden, but it's there nevertheless. And then on the top floor you had his real residency. So you had his living room, his bedroom, etc., and the whole thing is kept in the original state. So we were basically called to exhibit in a rather parasited environment, and we rarely deal with the human figure in our work, and we decided actually to challenge this idea of the anthropomorphic sculpture and monumental sculpture that basically reproduces the powerful people, the important people. And we went on to study these people that perform in the streets, trying to look like statues. I guess you must have seen them in touristic sites. So we reproduced three of them that we have actually seen in real life very faithfully, but with mannequins rather than human beings. So here you have objects that pretend to be subjects that pretend to be objects. It's dealing with the ready-made in a kind of circular way. So downstairs here in the basement you have Anonymous, which is obviously a reference to a demonstrator, to a black bloc, but one doesn't really understand if he's a left-wing or a right-wing demonstrator. He's got a smoke bomb in his pocket. He's got stuff to relieve himself from the tear gas, and he has like this kind of mimetic uniform, and he's this dark figure with a Guy Fawkes mask in the middle of all these sort of ghost-like white sculptures, and he's at the bottom of a long room. You can't really see that, but you have to imagine that the entrance is quite a way away. And then upstairs in the war room, there is a room that is really about the war. You can see all these allegories of war with the mercy and justice and all the victims, and this is Ataturk at the back. So we put a figure of wisdom and peace, which is Yoda, as you can see. So he's there, and he's suspended. There is this device that is used by these people that do the living statues. I suppose it exists in the States too. They have a seat that they can sit on and be in the air by having a piece of metal basically that is rigid and goes through their arm and goes behind their back and ends in this floating support where they can sit. These three sculptures are actually currently exhibited in New York in a very strange exhibition called Ready-Made Image, I believe, is the inaugural exhibition of the new Swiss center that deals with the ready-made, and the curators really wanted these three works that are there in this show completely, I would say, rather out of context, because they don't have all this space to breathe. It's a very crowded exhibition, but they have a new life, and but I would rather, I present them to you in their original context, because I think they were better here. And so, as you can see, Yoda is also begging. So lots of people made offers to this sculpture. Here you have another view of him. And another sculpture that, of course, Preview doesn't want to show you, and we really like, so I'm going to have to show it to you from this other list, because it's in another format. If it shows it here. It doesn't. So there is a third sculpture, which is Pinocchio, and it's another character, but I don't know where it is now. Well, I can show it to you from the website in the worst case, because it doesn't load for some reason. It's here, but it doesn't see it.
If you click on that, maybe it lands.
I doubt it. No. Maybe the Wi-Fi is not so powerful. Anyway. So I will see if the website works, because we're going to have to go there anyway later. So I'll try to... that's the thing. It doesn't seem to have a very strong signal. Sorry, technology is not always on our side. Here, let's see if I can find it. Here. So this sculpture here was the most allegoric one in a way, because I would say that it was a sort of active comment on Pietro Canonica's position, because it was installed in the reception room where he would receive his guests and stuff. And this is a sort of a creepy Pinocchio that we have actually seen in the street, and he has this not only is an adult, but he has this nose that is made of flesh. So it's obviously a sort of phallic element, but it's also something irredeemable, right? Because Pinocchio at some point becomes a child, becomes a human, and this guy cannot be humanized anymore as somebody that is full on into hypocrisy for some reason and cannot be redeemed. So it was, yeah, it was definitely an allegory of that. I don't know if there is another image. Yeah, that's the back, but I don't think it would show it large. So this was a selection for some kind of older works that we've made. And then today we were actually talking about social practice earlier. Yeah, we were invited like last year in the autumn to exhibit in an art festival in England, in this city that voted massively for Brexit. So this art festival was in this city, which is a kind of small city. I think it's smaller than Portland, Plymouth, isn't it?
I would imagine so.
Yeah. And so the festival was called We the People Are the Work, which is a strange title already. And so we were invited to make a project of social practice. We said, no, we don't do social practice with people we don't know. We don't land somewhere and use a device or a kind of formula to put people to work inside our artwork. We don't like it. It's disrespectful, and that's not what we do. So they said, okay, well, let's do a project, like an outdoor project. And we said, oh yes, we love doing things in spaces that are not the white cube. You know, we're totally for investing in the public space. And then it happened at the last minute that it wasn't possible for insurance reasons, that it would have been too dangerous because they wanted to put up a work in a neighborhood that was too rough, and it wouldn't have, the insurance wouldn't have covered the damage. And so in the end, we worked along with this artist-run space that was super nice, and they were very helpful and everything. So we created this exhibition that was somehow conceived as a gift to the Portland community, to the Portland population. Sorry, to the Plymouth population. I had a long day. To the Plymouth population, and so it was in this art center, and it consisted basically in a message of somehow, if not hope, but I would say of questioning things and looking at things in from a different angle. So we had this work at the entrance, which is inspired by, I don't know if you remember, but one of the first meetings about the single market, the presence of the UK in the single market, was plagued by this little scandal that one of the persons that attended the meeting that came out of Downing Street with a notebook open, and now you have these, you know, really powerful lenses that can blow up things from a very big distance. And so the notes were made public, and in these notes there was the plan of Great Britain, which was of the UK, that was have cake and eat it. This was their plan for Brexit. So of course reality couldn't be any further from that program, but nevertheless we like this expression, and we also took it first degree because it's kind of nonsensical, because as James always says, why would you have cake and not eat it? And also, I mean, why not being able to have things both ways? Why not being fully happy and completely fulfilled in general as a program? You know, of course, in this situation it was ridiculous, but putting it out of context, it sounded interesting. Here, actually, it looked like it was something, a sign from a cafe, because it was on this white wall, like a pizzeria wall. So it was sort of surreal. And then we had this work that is part of a series of works we've made with matches that are planted inside the wall. So the holes are drilled to create the drawing. We've made one of these works in Portland a few years ago at Pica, and it was America Unburned. This one that you're seeing here is the UK, and it actually has been burned. This is its aspect unburned. I mean, these works can be shown burnt and unburned, and when they're unburned, they're actually somehow more dangerous because people could set fire to them anytime with a lighter, so you're essentially sitting on a potential bomb. I mean, they're not particularly dangerous or anything. The fire was ferocious here, and it sort of melted some things around, but didn't do much damage, so this is the aspect when it's burned. I can also show you the video later if you want to see it, but that was it. And then there was another room. I'm glad it's showing this to you because it wasn't before. So where here, I mean, this was the large room, which was actually the exhibition space, and we had this other LED sign. We decided to experiment with this form that is even more ready-made than neon, that we have used a lot in our work. And so this is a quote from Trump. I don't know if you remember, this was the most inspired speech of his campaign, where he was explicitly referring to the themes of National Socialism, you know, what created fascism in Italy. He was talking to the working class, neglected people, to laid off factory workers, saying that they wouldn't be forgotten anymore because he was their voice, you know, like the millionaire that wants to be the voice of the forgotten poor people. So this was both the most convincing speech of Trump and the most perverse. And so we also, being a collective artist, as it's been said, every time we say I am or I do, or we use the noun I or we, one doesn't know who we're actually talking about. So of course we are the voice of no one. This is a quote, and it's in the space, and it's inviting people to think about what does it mean when people say I am your voice. And you know, it's obviously not that we are the voice of the people of Plymouth or of anyone else, but it's actually a real question illuminated by that. And here we don't have the following images that I'm gonna have to fetch. Here, if they appear, hopefully they do. No, same problem. So I don't know why it doesn't load them. I put them on the desktop because they weren't working, and then I put them back in the slideshow. I guess I'm gonna have to. So back on the website, just as well it's there. So
I think if you put in, you can show the whole exhibition.
Yes. It's not exactly quick, so maybe I'm gonna abandon this slideshow soon and just show you things from the website. It sounds easier and more agile, but yeah, so the search is sorry. The search is slow and
it's not, the internet is slow.
Yeah. You can scroll down, the images are not there.
Yeah, I can see them. I can see that there's an image here.
Sorry. You can imagine the images that we're not showing you, and this is a very new way of giving a talk. Like, imagine my work that you haven't seen, and tell me what it looks like. Now, I mean, it's, I mean, in this room, I can start describing it, so it gets, what are you doing?
I'm making a better search.
So, yeah, in this room, there were also 2 animated neon signs that are lifted from a book by a libertarian psychoanalyst called R.D. Lang. Does it ring a bell? Yeah. Well, Anita, you don't count, so it's so he wrote this book called Knots, about all the contradictions and the dead ends that relationships hit and about the double bind in several forms. You can keep imagining our work. It's a very...
Well, it's your internet connection.
It's a very interesting exercise. And or you can just go on the website by yourself when we finish this talk and check these things. We'll send you a list of the works we couldn't show you. Anyway, R.D. Lang has written down these sentences that are extremely disturbing and troubling. So we have animated for this exhibition 2 of them that seemed quite... okay, James will show you something else, and it's interesting.
Might as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That's... if it works, that's the action of setting fire to the UK. So the 2 sentences, one of them is, I do it because it's right because I do it. And the other one is, I get it, therefore I'm good, I don't get it, therefore I'm bad. So there are obviously 2 animated neon, they're white, on just installed on the wall, very simple. And they tackle these moral stereotypes of deserving things and earning things. Can we leave this white page because it's becoming
here
exasperating? Yeah. But it doesn't work.
It will work after a while.
Okay. So this is...
it's just buffering.
Yeah, it's a talk about meditation and patience and watching people being incapable of using technology.
It's not the technology, it's the internet connection.
Yes, but I had it loaded on my desktop and... Yeah, so this was one of the works. We will take the chance to show you the second one too. So this room was very dark, of course, and the only illumination were these 3 signs, I am your voice, and these 2 animated neons. And yeah, the curator was very unhappy. We went into a fight, and then he came up with a publication saying that we didn't work with anyone, we didn't play the game, and it was... I mean, people liked the show very much, but I guess he was upset with us. We're never gonna work.
He was upset with Fulvia.
Yeah, we're never gonna work together anymore. But anyway, we like this show, and it's nice to show it to you, because sometimes, you know, when things are difficult, one likes them more because they come out of a struggle, and yeah, they are more dear than easy things. Then I don't know, because in this slideshow that is working badly, and that I have, yes?
On the green one.
Oh, here they are. They're all showing up now. Yeah, the internet is slow. So on this slideshow, there were some works that we have resuscitated, like this was. A very old work. I'm glad it causes joy. This work is like the first exhibition we had as Fontaine was in Berlin. It was on something ridiculous, like January the 2nd, 2005. So we thought nobody was gonna turn up, but actually it was freezing. But actually it was a very nice opening, and so the show was in a space. I think I have images of the space, but I'm kind of afraid of this slideshow. I don't really wanna. Yeah, here you go. So that's the show. So this space no longer exists because you have to put view full screen if this is what you want to do. Yeah. Now it's the ticket office of the Volksbühne Theater. It's in Rosa Luxemburg Platz for the ones of you that are familiar with Berlin, but it's it was a very different Berlin at the time. It doesn't look like so long ago, but it actually is, and it was pretty rough there at the time. So anyway, this space was run by Joseph Strauss, who's a very interesting artist, and I mean, he wasn't there really to keep it open, and it was this completely glass, transparent cube. So we came up with these works that could be seen day and night from the street, and that would sort of attract the attention, a bit like Christmas lights and stuff. So we had this thank you marks that was flashing. And then we had Arbeit, Macht, Kapital, that is a maquette for a work that we made bigger with this K font sign that that is made out of neon tubes. So it's just a very simple way of making a neon sign. But this was a maquette; it was just small. And then we had a burned sign on a burned work on the ceiling, made with the flame of the lighter. So, but these marks. Neon was shown not so long ago in Pittsburgh in an exhibition that was made to celebrate the 200th birthday of Karl Marx by Carnegie Mellon, by a teacher that teaches critical theory in Carnegie Mellon. So it was sort of funny to to reactivate the work so long later. And I think we're gonna take him to LA and put it in the exhibition that we're gonna have there, because it's also a very ambiguous work in a way, because you don't know if Marx is thanking you or if we are thanking him, or also he obviously looked somehow like Father Christmas in that context there. So there are several layers of humor and complexity to the work. And then, yeah, I mean, I felt like showing this work because it's also like, yeah, we have this relationship with the reference, that is this obsession with the use value of the reference, and so we obviously applied in a sort of playful way in our work, trying to do something that is not exactly appropriation, but something we call expropriation, because in a way it makes the work more accessible than its original reference, and it brings it to it brings him a new life somehow. So this work was presented like a few years ago now in Newcastle, in a sort of biennial. That edition was called "Meanwhile, What About Socialism?" That is a quote from Orwell that is from there. So we presented this work. I don't know if I have another view. No, I don't. So this work is obviously an explicit reference to minimalism and to Carl André, but at the same time, it is, as you can see, a series of bricks that have been wrapped, covered with modified, scanned covers of the complete works, the collected works of Marx and Engels. So actually all these bricks that you see now, I don't have a better picture here in this slideshow, are each of them a different book from the collected works of Marx and Engels. There's been actually a big polemic because it was just so expensive to make this edition of their collected writings, to put it together. Like the publishers worked on it for years and years and years, I believe for 10 years or something, and then they didn't. They took them offline. They put them online, but they decided they couldn't afford to have them accessible, and so they removed them from circulation because they wanted people to actually buy the books. So in this case, in this particular case, I mean, the fact that these books have been transformed into bricks makes them talks about this relative inaccessibility of these works, but There's also this, I don't know, I often tell the story of how this idea of the brickbat, we've used this format of the brickbat also with singular work. This one really explicitly quotes Carl André, but we also make singular ones. Like this one is the diary of Carla Lonzi, which is a feminist writer that we are very inspired by. So it's a sort of homage to transform these books into bricks, to petrify them. But the idea of this work came from teaching, actually, because I remember I would always give to my students, I had young students, like 18-year-old students that just arrived to art school. They were at their first year, and I would give them a book in their hands, and they wouldn't just go through it and feel free to look at it. They would be just so paralyzed because they had been taught in school that they couldn't read, or they were unable to read, or they had to read a book from the first to the last page. And so I felt like I was giving them a piece of stone, something impenetrable and actually unusable. So in a way, yeah, this is a work about also the inaccessibility of books, and in a way their lack of use value, and it's a joke on the possibility of transforming them into weapons. You've seen they've used for advertising our talk the Society of Spectacle by the board. It is a kind of iconic work of ours about this. So here I believe I had selected some sort of feminist works of ours for some reason, because I guess I was invited to intervene inside a space in Zurich when I put together this slideshow where a feminist artist was showing art. Yeah, so she asked me to show some of our most feminist works. So somehow it's sort of interesting. This is hijacking the tournament of an artist that is actually also present in this ready-made exhibition in New York right now, in the Swiss Institut. He's a French artist called Philippe Thomas. He was active in the 80s, and he had made, he had created an agency to sell the rights of authorship of his artworks. So what would happen is that a collector would buy the work and then he would sign the work. So you don't have technically any Philippe Thomas around. So the artist would erase himself by doing this. But you have Jacques Salomon, Claire Bourrus, like all these collectors, Georges Vernet-Caron, and also he borrowed their names for writing. He has a very prolific activity of writer, and he uses this alter ego, this subjectivization of the collectors to write different texts about being a collector, being a cultural operator, and so on. So he made an advertisement poster for this agency that he had opened in New York called Ready-Mades Belong to Everyone. And so his actually original poster is on the right-hand side. And as you can see, he modifies images in a kind of interesting way, like advertising used to do when technology was sort of primitive. So by he remade some of the covers of these books. These books don't actually exist; they are inventions, they are props for this advert. And so did we on the left-hand side. Light box. These two are light boxes. They are not posters anymore. We gave them a sort of illuminated life, and so ours was a sort of, it was a feminist hijacking of the contents of Philippe Thomas. So we pushed this idea of the ready-mades belong to everyone into a feminist direction, inviting women to be creative, to go on and take on their their forces and just break the rusty chains of patriarchy and the system that supports male creativity and advertises it. This is a work from 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
I can't remember. I mean, it's
That's what it's like getting old.
Maybe you should read the text.
Yeah, but I can't.
Yeah, you can read it from here.
No, I can't. I have to blow it up, and I don't know if I can. So, no, I can't read the text. But you can read it on the website, I'm sure. And this is another work that is basically, again, playing with this idea of who is the we, who is the subject that is speaking. And it belongs to a series of paintings on paper and on canvas that begin with "we are all." So here, this painting in particular takes up this quote from Carla Lonzi that created this concept of the clitoridian woman in opposition to the vaginal woman. It's a very controversial idea, and her idea is that the clitoridian woman has an independent pleasure that doesn't connect directly with the danger of becoming pregnant with the reproductive activity. And so she is, because of this reason, because of this independent sexuality, stronger and less infeodated to the power of patriarchy. And so this is obviously a question more than an affirmation, also because we are all includes also men or transgender people. You don't know exactly who we are talking about. And this position of the clitoridian woman, of course, at the time where the book was written, was a very difficult position to defend. And so it's this this idea of this existential and political stance that translates directly into a certain attitude towards pleasure and towards sexuality, etc. And obviously the fact of putting it on top of this fake Warhol print really highlights the tragic destiny of Marilyn Monroe, which is, I mean, probably the most iconic work of his is to do with her, because she's probably this anti-star figure, this woman that was so tragic and had such a difficult and painful life, and was at the same time such an icon of desire. And this is a work that is much more recent. And then after this, maybe I'm gonna show you something from our website that is also entertaining and amusing, and then we can have a conversation if you want. So this is it's obviously a hijacking of Duchamp. We have the bearded version too, and it exists also under the form of a postcard that you can take with you. It's actually an exhibition. It's currently exhibited in Rome, in Villa Medici, in that same location where I was showing you these early works. And so you can sort of bring home or send to someone this doubt about our own sexual identity, and about the ambiguity that was, of course, the intention of Duchamp when he made this pun and this joke of Elle a chaud au cul, which means, as you all know, she has a hot ass, she's hot. So that's what he wrote under the Mona Lisa, and so we translated it into the LGBTQ. That kind of brings it back to the original question about the Mona Lisa, that of course we don't know if it's a man or a woman, and or something in between. And and it's a kind of interesting and fertile question. I just wanted to show you something else from the website that is a work that is closely related to this, because it's, how do you go back? Where?
What do you want? The Me Too?
The Me Too, yeah. So this is also sort of starting from the idea of the postcard. Is that's really tonight where we've had too much of a long day. So this is yeah, I mean it's a question, right? About now that we know for sure that all the history, all the art history, and especially the history of painting are the direct product of patriarchy, and that the way women are presented inside this history is always an objectifying way. What do we do with that patrimony, right? What do we do with this heritage? What do we do with this history that is the only history that we have? So we chose three images. I guess we only have this one available to show you, but this is of course the Olympia. Then we took also the Déjeuner sur l'herbe by Manet and the Ingres, La Grande Odalisque, where this woman is at the Turkish bath at the sauna, and she's turning her head and looking at the beholder, at the spectator. So it's this question that when the woman in the painting is looking at the viewer, what is she actually saying? You know, she still is objectified, although she's looking back. She has this gaze where she's looking back, but she's still in a situation of total abuse. So this sort of tag there is a way of bringing back this, ironically, this situation and this condition of the character of the painted woman, the model, within art history and the tradition of painting. I think maybe we could stop here and we can have a conversation if you wish. Yes? No? Is that fine? Okay. And we can also show you other things if you have particular questions or particular things you would like to see or talk about. Show you these things that are entertaining in the meantime. So these are also neons. They're very large. They're like 3 meters by 4 or something, and they come from a diagram, a very early diagram that Carla Lonzi reproduced in her book that I was talking about, The Vaginal Woman and the Clitoridian Woman. So this is the diagram of the female orgasm, and this is the diagram of the male orgasm. So they were shown side by side here in Vienna, and they were against a black background, so they looked like they were on a sort of blackboard. And this was in 2008, I guess, when there were just all these graphics about the economy that were all going down. So we just thought that this really put everything into perspective in somehow a different way, and also enlighten subject matters that are not so much spoken about in a sort of abstract way. Of course, Duchamp has a history of representing desire in a diagrammatic way, but this was an idea we've had a long time ago, and as everybody is very shy, I'll keep showing you stuff. So this is. Where is... Oh, we're missing the... Oh, my God. This is exasperating. Okay, so...
Here's a question.
Yes.
Because you sent us to your website, I was looking at it on my phone, and there's a series called Untitled that are made out of balloons.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you could talk about that. It's not as obvious to me as some of the other work as to what the point is, I guess.
Oh, you
maybe
mean
because it's partly in French, but
no, I don't think it's what James thinks it is. Is it a balloon or it's a ball?
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, okay. So this is called Untitled Foreign Bodies. I will put it up here so everybody can see it if I am able to use this website that I don't find so user-friendly because I am
Handicap.
yeah, exactly, a technological handicap, and because James and our fancy graphic designer made it together, and I feel completely excluded. But this is just between you and I, and this graphic designer is too sophisticated to do anything that is accessible to me. Anyway, these works, these are. Works that, again, I would say this. Wow, this internet connection is slow. I would say they're strongly related to, for example, to camp installation, right? Because they evoke the body in a kind of abstract way. These objects are actually objects that do have a use value. Can we show the details? Can you go into the details, please? As you're here and you're not doing much. So, yeah, these objects actually don't exist in the commerce, but have to be fabricated in... Can you leave them on for a second? Thank you. And they are used in the Messier method, in the tresse method in anti-gymnastic, to be put under muscles to relax them. So basically, you insert a foreign body onto a tense muscle that immediately gets more tense in the beginning, and then progressively gives up and actually learns how to relax through this hostile contact of this ball that goes onto it. So what is the ball made of? It's made of seeds, like tiny, tiny seeds of millet. I don't know how you call this thing. It's a thing that birds eat. It's these tiny round seeds. Human beings eat it too, but it doesn't taste of much. It's one of these things that we eat today because it's supposedly good for us, but doesn't have any taste. Like it looks a bit like quinoa, but smaller. You must imagine millet. That's it. And so it's two balloons around millets that create these balls, and they are colorful. And of course, the idea of having this crowd there was to manifest this metaphor that the foreigner and the stranger that we reject instinctively is actually the presence that is going to help us access ourselves in a much better way, in a much more empowering way, and it's going to also help us to relax, and teach this muscle that is constantly tense that it can also, restart working properly. Because when a muscle is always tense, that's what the Bertera idea is. It's a muscle that is not really working. Because in order to work, a muscle has to be able to relax and contract. If it's always tense, it's not working. It's going to actually damage itself and eventually become useless. And it's also going to forbid the other muscles around to work. So it's a metaphor of the social body at work. And it's also a colorful and joyful sculpture for once in the landscape of our practice. What were we trying to show before? Okay. No, we were trying to show redemptions that wasn't showing up in the slideshow. The installation that we presented in the CCA in San Francisco 60 years ago, when we were there for a residency, teaching social practice. It persecutes us, and it's like, really, it was surreal. So that's the image we don't have So here you go. So that was the. So they asked us to make the inaugural us, and Werner Herzog, who unfortunately didn't show up, but he had the back room. He had a nice video installation, and we had the front. So the front is this huge space. Like they just moved to this new building, and this was the first exhibition there. And so they wanted us to make a show there, like the first show, the opening show for the end of our residency. And it's not such an easy space because it's a vaulted space. It's very tall and very inhuman scale. It's a former industrial building. So we did a sort of hijacking of the Duchamp coal sax installation that he presented at the Surrealist exhibition. So we suspended these sacks from the ceiling, but we used actually recycled cans. Can we show a detail of the sack? So each sack contained 250 cans, and actually they came from the recycling. Here you have them moving even, but this is not. This is nothing to do with it. But imagine that it does have something to do with it. So no, these are the same sacks, but they are presented in a different way. But anyway, so the idea of this show was called Redemptions, because of course these cans get taken to the redemption center, but it played on this idea of the ready-made and redeemed that Duchamp had in mind, you know, ready-made, ready-made, he used to say. So this idea of the redeemed object comes from this fact that the ready-made is objectively something vulgar and of common use, that the artist that is sensitive to the infra-thin subtracts to the kingdom of the vulgar things and puts into this space of the artwork. So the artist grants this vulgar object the status of artwork, except that for this installation of ours, these cans had this status for just a temporary time. So they, because after the exhibition, they would actually go back to being redeemed. So we were borrowing these cans. We were taking them out of this cycle of the recycling for a certain amount of time. We were making them into artwork for a certain amount of time, and then re-injecting them in the cycle of their use value and their redemption.
These cans were collected by homeless people to redeem at the redemption center, right?
Yes. Originally, they were collected by homeless people, so we bought them from homeless people like the Redemption Center would do, and then the CCA sold them back to the Redemption Center. So that was the cycle. So these sacks were artworks only for the length of the exhibition. That was the idea. And also it created this space where the ceiling was lowered, and it was a totally different experience of the space, of the exhibition space.
What were you saying earlier about, were you teaching social practice at CCA when and then you made a comment about the other? What were you saying about the social practice?
Well, we have issues with this idea of social practice because it does work very well in some particular cases where there are communities that are really in touch with the artist, that actually comes to interact with them. And so in that case, of course, it's a very fertile idea because you bring art outside of its usual territory, and you put it out of the pedestal and the usual separation from the public, and it's a more inclusive device. Except what normally happens is that the artist creates a standard device that is applied to every sort of population that is disadvantaged, so it's very patronizing because there is no respect for the singularity of the context. And the results are poor, usually. And we, with our own practice that actually plays very much with this idea of the subjectivization and questions ourselves as artists, as authors. I mean, we are kind of in a situation where we are already creating a constant critique and self-critique of exhibition making, art making. This is the artist does, but in our case is somehow the explicit content and context of what we do. This puts us in a strange situation if we have to export these professional problematics in a space that has its own problems and its own, specificity, because we work in the art world. And of course, we work with concepts and problems that don't come from the art world, that don't come from the formalistic tradition, that don't only come from conceptual art. But we do work in that context. If we want to have an activist practice, we want to have it with people, not for people. We want to be on the same level as the people we do things with. We don't want to go there and teach them anything because we don't feel like we have anything to teach or to give from a sort of superior position. What we do professionally is as good as what they do professionally for their job, in these communities where they ask you to intervene, including if they are unemployed, it's as good as what we do. So why would I go there and, impose a protocol to do what? I don't, with our practice, it just doesn't function. That's what I want to say. And then, again, teaching social practice is kind of complicated, right? Because what does one actually teach? That's in Europe, it doesn't really exist as such, and we were talking about this beforehand. And yeah, I mean, probably teaching is already a sort of social practice in itself. So it's a paradoxical thing to do for us. I don't know if I've been very clear.
Well, yeah, no, you're clear. I guess I'm curious how you got wrapped up in that. Like, was it through activism and artwork that kind of touches on activism that you got kind of umbrellaed under that term? Or
I suppose so. I suppose John Armleder or Jeff Koons don't get asked to teach social practice, no. But we do. So that's how it goes. You get some curious invitations and you've got to respond.
I wonder if you could speak a bit about the terms of your collaboration, and I'm also curious how you've chosen to stage the talk.
Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Well, it's quite antagonistic, probably.
I mean, I'm the one that usually talks during the talks, but you can also ask questions explicitly to James, so maybe he's going to say something if you do, not for sure. Yeah, I mean, the terms of our collaboration, I don't know, we pretty much share all the burdens and the complexity of the art making, and especially the endless discussions that lead to agreeing on something. But we still enjoy it, and we still think we can do better things together than separately. So we keep doing it, but it's mostly this idea of this practice of having a space where we are actually not ourselves. When we're working as Claire Fontaine, we really experience this space of desubjectivization where our personal biography is not important, is not at play in what we do, and we can really go forward by, thinking about problems, being inhabited by contradictions and problems that are bigger than us and are distant from us as individuals, and it really has a very liberating effect for us, and it connects us with energies that we wouldn't access probably as individual artists.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Fulvia. This was really, really useful and interesting. And I was just curious, when you were talking about the mannequin piece, you know, I found it really fascinating how you were describing this whole movement of like, you know, it's a subject that plays an object that then gets reanimated as a subject. Is that right? Subject to object to subject. And I'm curious as to whether, I mean, maybe this is just a thought, but that in terms of the project of desubjectivization, that with the ready-made, you know, and with the objects that you use, that there's kind of like a reverse logic there of like that the objects then take on subjectivity and kind of get animated in these ways and get almost, you know, thought of in terms of their commodity logic or in terms of their taking on subjectivity.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring question. I mean, in a way, the art practice is this practice of historically of humanizing the object, right? Of making the object speak to the person in a way that the commodity cannot do. So that justifies this very eccentric position of the art market and why, you know, the artwork has a price and a status that are incomparable to any other type of artifacts in society. But then with the ready-made, we, you know, you witness a sort of revolution that we haven't probably entirely come to terms with, which is the fact that, yet the artist desubjectivizes himself and says, you know what, I'm not actually making the object, I'm finding the existing potentiality of being an artwork in the object that has been made by someone else, in the artifacts, in the object that has a vulgar life. I can see this possibility of this transcendence and this incredible other life that the artwork has. And by being sensitive to this potentiality that is obviously there, you know, this magic that is in the object, etc., Duchamp and the people that have followed his legacy have created these artworks that are very special because they are both this vulgar object with a use value, but by not having this use value, they do acquire an aura. This was the critic of Dan Graham, you know, like, yes, but Duchamp hasn't broken the aura of the art, of the artwork, you know. And he actually, Duchamp himself actually says that he would rather be esoteric about it, not talk about it, because he's conscious about the fact that these artworks do have an aura, exactly like other artworks. So I think there is some political promise in this gesture, that is that something can be redeemed, something can have, you know, a different life, a different can be looked at in a different way, and there is obviously a potential revolutionary message there, that is that probably the status of the artwork could be abolished as such and given back to a sort of general redemption of any object, of anything that is usable and, you know, conceive the life itself as an artwork ultimately, right? Because this is the revolution that this gesture promises, and this is very appealing and very interesting, I think, because it's almost comparable to the demand of the salary for the domestic work. You know, if you get paid for domestic work, for your reproductive work as a woman, then the whole structure of the society, the whole salary system crumbles down, because, you know, you just have to be paid to be alive, just to live your life. And so I think, yeah, these are very promising horizons, and they're very close, they're very accessible. They don't entail changing anything, you know. It's somehow like a sort of really messianic idea of how things could change. It's just a little shift of looking at things differently, and then they become immediately possible.
Last question? Comment?
So James has put on an image that maybe needs to be explained. These are ingots that were made out of a few bags of these cans. So each of them is 250 cans, and they actually are the ingots that they produce in the redemption centers for recycling the metal, the aluminium of the cans, and we got them stamped with the term redemptions on it, and yeah, we kept them as the only trace of this work, of this installation that has completely disappeared.
Thank you.
Thank you.